Our Torah reading is focused on Moses preparing to say goodbye to the people. That includes God appointing, and Moses empowering his successor Joshua. But the other key focus is Moses speaking to the people. Top of page 1175. Hakehel etaham. God says, gather the people. Ha'anashim v'hanashim, the men and the women. V'hataf, and the children. V'gercha asher b'sharecha, and the residents that are in your gates. Leman yishma'u, so that they will listen. Uleman yilmedu, so that they will learn. Vayiru et Adonai Elohechem, and have fear of the ever-present one, your God. Vishamru la'asot et kol divrei haTorah hazot, so that they will observe and do this entire Torah. What's remarkable about this verse is the emphasis on the need for every member of the community to be present, to learn, and to do. It's not just, in this case, for the men, and there's a footnote that's interesting by Rabbi Harold Kushner in that regard. It's not just for the men. It's not just for the adults. It's not just for the Israelites. It's for everybody who is within this land. You together, in order to prosper, in order to be a cohesive community, all must learn, hear the Torah, and must observe. The need for the collective to be together trustingly of each other and of authority was driven home to me in my travels. And I just want to tell you a little bit about a visit to Nepal as an example of the importance of government and what happens when there is not government in place. And then I want to talk about the storms that are raging on our East Coast and in the Philippines today. Nepal used to be thought of as a magical kingdom. It had a king. 50 years ago, there were certain hippies who went there, and they described this land with the tallest mountains in the world, called the roof of the world, Himalayan peaks well over 30,000 feet. Peaks that were covered with snow, not only the tallest, not only Mount Everest, but the lower mountains of the range of the Himalayas were covered in snow all the time. And the people were mostly farmers, living largely a Buddhist religious life with a king that seemed to be magical. Today, Kathmandu is 15 times larger in population than 50 years ago. It went from about 350,000 to 5 million with no significant changes in infrastructure. Today in Kathmandu, the traffic is a snarl. The roads are not well suited for two-lane traffic in most places. And you have cars constantly jostling and avoiding potholes. You have motorcycles, which is the new prosperity. The rise of greater affluence throughout Asia means that now people, because they're working at jobs in the city, have some extra money, have motorcycles. And they're moving in every which direction. In a city of 5 million, there is one traffic signal. There are 20,000 traffic cops, which does make for work, and it's chaos. With all these cars and motorcycles on the road, you look at the pedestrians, and large percentage wear masks. because the air quality is so poor due to all the pollution from all those vehicles and from burning coal that the air is difficult to breathe. Linda couldn't breathe, and I developed pneumonia in a matter of 2 to 3 days being in Kathmandu. So much for Magical Kingdom. There's a law in Nepal that a person driving a motorcycle needs to wear a helmet. As often as not, motorcycles have more than one person on it. The only one more often than not wearing the helmet is the driver, because the law only was written to require the driver to wear a helmet, which is only to say that in places in which laws are poorly written, people will do, more often than not, what's easiest for them. And, that means not having a helmet. One story. We had a good friend, the creator of Tevel B'Tzedek, Micha Odenheimer, who has friends living in Kathmandu. And Tevel B'Tzedek is this Israeli Peace Corps operating in Nepal for the last 10 years, trying to help people in villages learn more contemporary farming techniques, giving them a better opportunity to make a living. And so our friend Micha gave us some names of expats, friends of his living in Kathmandu, to meet. And on our last night in Kathmandu, we had dinner with a priest and who's lived in Kathmandu for 25 years, and a University of Michigan professor who was his friend that night. So we went out. And he told the following story, the priest. He said that there was a Norwegian couple that were visiting, and they rented a car. And in front of them in traffic, they came to a standstill, and a motorcycle that didn't slow down clipped the end of their car on a very big motorcycle, and the driver flew off and broke his neck. Now the couple felt really bad. They were sitting in traffic at this point, and they had him, the driver on the side of the road. And when the ambulance finally came, the couple, who felt so sad by the situation, got in the ambulance to go to the hospital to accompany the motorcycle. Well, the police took their passports at the hospital and assumed that if they had come to the hospital, they must have felt responsible for what had taken place. And they put them, the man died in the emergency room, and the couple were taken to jail. Young couple in their 20s. They had their passports, and they had to pay several $1,000s for the woman to get out of jail, but they kept the man in jail. And the money that was paid, according to the priest, was, and I'm holding back his name only because it's getting recorded, they held back, the man was still in jail when we were having dinner with him. This had happened like a week before, like 10 days before. And he said the money that was paid for the woman to get out was probably kept by the police. And the Interior Department had heard about it, and they wanted some money too. And the guy was still in jail, and he didn't know how it was going to unfold. And he said to us, he said, if that ever happened to me here in Nepal, I would have taken my car directly to the airport, left it there, and got on the next plane out of the country. Because as long as you're in the country, the corruption is such that everybody's going to want to make some money off of you. Now, I tell you that extreme story because it was dramatic to hear it, and to hear it from somebody who is dedicated to serving the people of Nepal, 25 years teaching in the community. And he said that the level of corruption is such here that nobody trusts anybody politically. A little bit, only a taste of the history of Nepal. It was a monarchy in which the kings and the queens built many palaces and kept the money. And there was a rivalry between the king and his brother, who was not the king, and a crown prince, I'm not sure if it's 15 years ago or 20 years ago, you may recall this, came in and he killed all his family members. And the uncle took over as king, and the uncle was not adept, and then the military did a coup over the new king, making it a military government. And while we were there, they had only put into place a constitution for the first time to have their first real national election, and they elected a Maoist government, which means, as was explained to us, a government more identified with China than India, because of where it sits. And the government that had been in place, and the reason the Maoist government was elected, was more identified with India and had become very corrupt. To pull all this piece together, sadly, Nepal was a case study in how a nation that is not a collective, in which people don't trust their government, is a country that doesn't function. 20-year-old men and also women. The greatest export of Nepal is human labor all over the world. I met a man whose wife was an au pair in Israel. Mostly they go to the United Arab Emirates. If you're a man in your 20s, large percentage, you have to leave because there is no real work. Tourism being its biggest industry. Well, that's one story. I could talk more because every country has its own history of how it operates politically, for good and for bad. I mean, from Nepal we went to Bhutan, another mountain kingdom in the Himalayas with 800,000 people, smaller, and in which there's a benign king, tightly controlled, and people sharing a common story of being an extended family. And things there, in contrast to Nepal, here's an example of good government. Already 25 years ago, the king of Nepal, king number 4, said, I believe the future of my kingdom is a constitutional monarchy. No longer only me to have the power, will elect a parliament. The king, he was about 55 at the time, will have to retire at the age of 63. He, king number 4, said that rather than having a gross domestic product, we will have a gross happiness product as a way to decide if we are successful or not as a country. And our schools will have 5 hours of English a day out of the 8 hours, because for us to be part of the world and to prosper economically, be a place of tourism, all of us need to speak English. And so in Bhutan, which is working relatively well for a country with relatively few natural resources, because it's mountainous, over 60% of the land by law has to remain forest, so that their carbon footprint, also part of their identity, has to be such that they are producing more oxygen in the system. And at the moment, although the law requires it be 60%, it's 73%. It's a country that seems to be operating well. So when government does not work, like Nepal, where people don't trust the police, where people do not trust the elected officials, there's very little hope for the future. Economically, things don't work, and it's sad. And when you go to their neighbor, where in their case things are working well, there's hope for the future and pride of belonging. Well, the floods are occurring in unprecedented ways. Every year for the last 5 years has been hotter than the year before. We see it here. You see it more where you go out into the world. In Nepal, the mountains used to be white all year round. We were there in November. They're now patchy in the Annapurna range. That's new. And with that, there's also drought. The rivers, without the snow melting, aren't the fisheries allowing villagers to prosper the way they did, which is another reason that Nepalese have to go elsewhere to make a living. It's not only that it's difficult in the city of Kathmandu, but it's difficult to do what they've always done, farm and fish. And so climate change, all the more when you leave America, is the story of the world. I said to somebody in India, in New Delhi, when you land at the airport, you cannot see the other planes because of air pollution. I said to an economist in India, what's your hope for the future? The air is just so bad you can't breathe in Mumbai and New Delhi. And he said, well, we're hoping to do lots of tree planting, and hopefully electric cars will become the future, because clearly cars and the emissions and coal burning in these Asian countries is the source of enormous pollution that you can see. But the part that you also see is that when you step into a shower at a fancy hotel in Cape Town, there's an egg timer reminding you not to use more water than you need because of all of Africa's in drought. The world has changed so fast in terms of its climate. And you don't see it when you're living here necessarily with air conditioning. But when you don't have air conditioning and you're living in these poorer places, and where you're dependent on the soil to feed you rather than the supermarket, your life is in turmoil. And so we're in turmoil. We're watching these two huge storms as we sit here. Over 1 trillion gallons of water is going to fall on it. 13 trillion? See, I always don't want to exaggerate. I remember the trillion when I was reading it. 13 trillion gallons of water are going to fall on the East Coast. And the winds and the damage in the Philippines make that typhoon even more. And it's, it's not only, what the climate scientists say is it's not that they've never had bad storms. There have been. It's the frequency. It's the frequency. So know that there is nothing I can do about it as Elie Spitz. Very little. Climate change is too overwhelming, which returns me to pulling this together and our Parsha. There are things that go on in the world that no one person can change. Even if you got billions of dollars, it's not enough. Bill Gates can't do it. Bill Gates Society can't do it. And it's not even one country that can do it, not when it comes to the climate change. Right now, as of 10 years ago, China surpassed the United States as the biggest polluter. We held that honor till then. But we still are doing more than twice as much pollution in terms of carbon dioxide and green gases. Americans twice as much as the average Chinese because we're richer and we can do it. And that's despite the fact that they're more reliant on coal than we are, which is such a source of pollution. No one country can do it. It takes collective effort. But countries do make a difference, meaning it has to be, like in this parsha, it's not just a command, because Moses knows he's going to be done soon. He is commanded by God to gather everybody in the land together to learn, to study, to do. There are big projects that require collective trust, that require collective understanding, that require collective action. Climate change is the big issue of planet Earth today. There are a lot of problems. There are a lot of political issues. But my driving a Prius, which is worth doing, or in my case a hybrid, is only symbolic in serving a problem, which is significant too. But there has to be a collective will, a collective understanding. And not unlike those people in Nepal, when the law says you only have to have a helmet on the driver, as often as not, only the driver wears the helmet, and people overlook the real dangers to the passengers. Unless there's a collective will to pass laws that matter, our natural instincts is to do what's easiest for us in the moment. That's human nature. And so I'm sad today to know that so many people are suffering due to climate change in these storms that are now raging. The waters and the skies have opened and water is falling by the trillions of gallons. And for people who ignore it, I have no words. Because once I begin to use words, they won't be helpful. Because I ultimately see it as grounded in selfishness. Ribbon Shalom, Master of the universe, may we gather together far and wide, because you know, they say when you have little children, you have little problems, bigger children, big problems. My daughter here, I have very little problems, I'm fortunate. But the point is the same, you know, a little world, little simple world, the world somehow seems simpler. A big technologically sophisticated world, the bigger problems are bigger. The capacity to destroy is greater, whether in war or in peace. And the shanda is that peace becomes like war when we pollute, when we fail to learn because of our own immediate needs for comfort and our own willingness to ignore not just those around us, but generations after us. Ribbon Shalom, Master of the universe, as you had Moses call the people together to prepare to enter the promised land, may we gather together now to make the lands in which we live lands that we care for and tend, so that we can live in peace. Amen.